Hi, my name's Cathy McCulloch. I'm co-director at Children's Parliament, and I'm delighted to be part of this Year of Childhood conversation with Claire Lightowler. Claire, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi Cathy, I'm Claire Lightowler. I'm Director of the Children and Young People Centre for Justice.
Great. And we are really thrilled to have you as part of this Year of Childhood conversation, which I know is one of the last things you'll be doing in your role as director. I'm sure it doesn't feel like you're winding down just now. You'll be really busy getting things tied up and planning your exciting next steps. But this is Year of Childhood, and we are really keen in Year of Childhood to think about what does a rights-based approach look like, and what is the journey to a rights-based approach? What are the opportunities, the challenges? What difference does it make? And so I've got a few questions that will help guide our conversation, but really this is just an informal conversation, so please feel free to take the conversation where you would like it to go. Throughout your work, you have clearly had a huge impact, and your organisation is known for the quality of and impact of its work. So maybe you could just kick off by talking a wee bit about what it was like at the beginning. What did you come into? What were your experiences and feelings at the very start?
Yes, it's so lovely to be given this chance to do that and think back to that time. You know, I was 34, which for a director of a centre was relatively young, or I certainly came in thinking that people may not take me seriously, people may not see me in that kind of space, I may not have the gravitas, or so that was me as a person then coming in and seeing this range of extremely complex issues for very troubled and challenged children. And I think that was the kind of language and tone at that time about troubled children, vulnerable children, and this balance of vulnerability and risk. So seeing children almost through these dichotomies then of victim or perpetrator, and very much, and we still see that. It's not that way of thinking has gone away, but there was very much this kind of a recognition that children are both, but then yet seeing children either as victims or perpetrators of harm through our various pieces of the system, if you see what I mean. And so I think that was the kind of context that I came into. And obviously the numbers of children in the justice system at that time, so it was 2013, and when I reflect on where we are now in 2021, the proportion of children then in the courts is down around 40%. The proportion of children that are in our young offenders institution is down about 67%. I looked at the figures just last week, and we have 17 children in a young offenders institution or prison. When I started, there was about 70 on any one
Wow.
day. So the pace of change has been massive, and that was already building on change. It wasn't that that I joined and the journey started. It was already, those numbers were changing. So I came in then thinking so much about the bits of the system and what needed to be done, and thinking about the complexity of that. And for me, the journey personally, for my way of thinking, is really being about rights and thinking about children as rights holders. Of course, they are still victims of adversity and harm and poverty and all these kind of issues that they are grappling with, and we as adults need to support them with. They are also potentially sometimes able to cause harm, sometimes quite significant harm to other people. These are truths, but they are also rights holders, and seeing children as rights holders as the lens through which you think about their journeys through the care and justice systems, I think just changes your whole way of thinking. And for me, that's the difference. That's the key difference that I think we're getting to as a kind of group of people, a society. Eventually, I think at the moment it's quite professional kind of focused, but I think that's the journey we're on. And obviously it builds on Kilbrandon, and some of the key work setting up the children's hearing system back in the 60s. These are not alien concepts to a model and an approach in Scotland that has always been about recognising and putting children at the centre and recognising their status as children. But the rights dimension of Kilbrandon, it for that time, you know. So so it feels very exciting to have been working on something that is so compatible with a Scottish model, but really takes it to that next step, rather than resting on the laurels of, you know, we have all these great things about the children's hearing system and our approach, but really now it's time for, right, but what next? How do we really, really improve the situation for these children?
And did you arrive with that mindset? Did you arrive knowing that you wanted to embed a rights-based approach and look at the whole issue through a rights lens?
No, absolutely didn't. It was only after several years in the role, and you know, kind of rights were on the periphery almost of the work. You know, you kept sort of noticing it and stumbling across the rights kind of way of thinking, if you like. But it wasn't the way we were framing it. It wasn't the way we were looking at the system and the approach. And it was a colleague of mine, Nina Vaswani, and she probably doesn't even remember saying it. She said, I think we should spend more time thinking about rights as a framework for what we're doing. And it stuck with me. And it probably, you know, in the busyness of the work and doing so many other things, it was probably just the thing that ticked over in my mind at times, you know, for a year or two before I said, yeah, actually, this is the task that's needed to be done, to think about the whole system, everything that we're doing with children in conflict with the law from the perspective of rights. And then I navigated and negotiated a sabbatical for a year for myself to spend that time doing that thinking about, like, what does that mean? And crucially, what does that look like for practice and policy? And how do we get that? What are the steps? What are the things that need to change along that way to ensure that we are rights-based and compliant with UNCRC?
And so when that was a great idea, actually, to take that time away to really get to grips with it and think about it. So when you came back into the organisation, how did you approach that with the rest of the team? Because we know that traditionally this is something that can be quite difficult and challenging to get across to people, because often it's seen as a bit of an additional thing you think, as you said, you think about when at the end of a busy day or when you've got 5 minutes. So what approach did you take to make this relevant and meaningful across your team?
Well, I think, to be honest, you know, although I was the one taking that time to really do that deep work to think about what it meant for a system, I think the whole team had been on we'd been on the same journey collectively. So, and as I was away, I was actually in this room for a year before this year of COVID, doing that thinking. So although I was distant in terms of where I was and how I was working and thinking, the team was still engaged in dialogue with me about what I was thinking about. I was feeding in ideas. So as I came back in January 2020, I think already many of the ideas had percolated into the team, and I was reflecting what the team had been working on. It wasn't me. It felt like I was the carrier for the ideas that the team were having that we just didn't have time to really think deeply about. So yeah, everyone was keen that we did this work. Everyone recognised the importance of doing that. It's a very special team and it's a very special group of people, so that bit wasn't hard. What obviously then potentially is a little bit more challenging, potentially, is for some other people, for some other stakeholders that don't have the time to think about these things, because it just feels like, potentially it can feel like another thing to do, another thing you're being criticised for, another thing to invest in. All of these issues are, you know, really live for people. But obviously our approach, and you know, I'm lucky in the organisation that I've been leading, you know, the approach is working very much with people on a journey of change. So we are generally seen as, and are able to be supportive to them in thinking about, what does this mean for what you do, how you write that email, how you hold that meeting, very practical kind of things to help translate otherwise what can be quite abstract ideas into something that's much more tangible and real, and do that work, help do that work with them, because I think so often people are left with the idea or the aspiration without that kind of support about and time to think and reflect about how you do that.
So how did you approach it then? I mean, were there any particular surprising sources of support or pockets of support or opportunity that you built on?
Yeah. I mean, the thing about this work is, and it is interesting because I was thinking, like, who's been a supporter, who's been a blocker. It's not that simple. Everyone at times, including me, has been a blocker to change. And I think that's the truth of the situation, because when you're dealing with complex change and system-wide change, it's not the responsibility of any one organisation to change. We're talking about, like looking at issues like the opportunities to support children in the community, rather than depriving them of their liberty in various spaces. That's a system problem. It's not just one organisation. So it requires that collaboration, that dialogue, that discussion. And so in terms of the approach, it's talking to people, like properly talking to people, not a talking head, not a lecture. You do those things, they're useful things to do, but actually engaging in dialogue and listening to what their concerns are, how they're thinking about things, and changing your mind if, on the basis of that, really getting a rich conversation and investing that time in those relationships. But when I reflect on like the kind of stakeholders that, for want of a better word, it's not a great word, is it? But the people that have been involved in supporting change for children in conflict with the law in Scotland, there's just been amazing people, some of whom, will never reach the kind of policy space or the kind of leadership. They won't be known as leaders, but they're on the ground doing this work day in, day out. And the care and the sort of care and justice experienced children and young people themselves have been part of this, recognising the importance of their rights, and sometimes starting to challenge the professionals around them about when their rights are not being upheld, and practitioners are starting to support them to do that work and to do that challenging. So yeah, go on, Cathy, sorry.
So did you have a role then? Did your organisation have a role in supporting practitioners to take that approach, to think about a rights-based approach? Or was it very much they were working on their own and then you would come in at certain times on that journey and have a conversation? And I'm also interested in the relationship then with your strategic colleagues within these organisations, because it can sometimes be difficult to make that fit, can't it? There can be great practice, but not really strategic buy-in, or there can be strategic buy-in, but not great practice. So how do we, it's how you bring those two together. How did you approach that?
Well, I think one thing we do at CYCJ is we are a space for reflection and thinking and supportive dialogue. So being a space and offering that space and providing that to people through, lots of opportunities to share ideas and things. I think first of all, that is just an open opportunity for people to then do this work themselves, almost with us as a facilitator of that, rather than us having an active role. So that's, I think, part of what we do and what we kind of have offered. And then the other bits is the kind of the way, I suppose, the kind of structures of change in the kind of the world we call youth justice, that we're no longer entirely comfortable about that terminology because, well, what is it? Where is it? What are the boundaries of it? We talk about children in conflict with the law and their journeys and experiences through different systems and organisations. But for shorthand, I will use it because it's still some of the way that other people frame the system. And in the kind of world of this kind of change, I suppose, change program, it's not called that, but it's a kind of change program for youth justice. There's a structure to it. So there's been a youth justice improvement board at the strategic level that's involved in the kind of conversations about where we're going and what we should do. And then underneath that, where I think the real magic happens, there's 3 different implementation groups that are focused on key system changes. So for instance, about supporting the children's hearing system to support all children up to the age of 18. So they've been working on that work for a good few years now into that detailed work. So it's that mix of then people who are practitioners, strategists, researchers, people with lived experience, and policymakers and people with that system know-how. And the kind of models we've always tried to work to is getting that balance then of lived experience, research, policy and practice, because that's where we think there's the greatest potential for change, because you need all those types of expertise to come together, and you create a new form of expertise by bringing all of that together. So that's the kind of model that I suppose we've used for everything, including the rights kind of framing work.
And how much of the conversation was rooted in prevention? It's something that I think is quite often misunderstood, or it's just not, it's not recognized that actually what we're talking about is moving work upstream. We're talking about prevention. So clearly the stats that you gave me at the beginning were, that's huge, isn't it? That's a really significant impact. But how much is it in the open, that conversation about what we're talking about is prevention? Is that part of the conversation?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because for us, that whole issue about prevention and demonstrating prevention in our world is incredibly problematic. Not just for the technical reasons, but because, like, how do you operationalize that as a practitioner? How do you find the children that might commit crime and do things that will prevent that behavior? It's intrinsically problematic as an approach, because you are labeling, you are stigmatizing, you are damaging children by that way of thinking. Of course, it's about prevention. It is about prevention or early intervention, or, as you say, that is right. But that way, that terminology, that way of thinking, and that way of trying to evidence change is problematic in our world. But what we think, where we think there's real value then, is about rights and inclusion as prevention, because how do you prevent? You respect rights. This will do the same thing. This will prevent all of these other things, but you don't need to think about it on the ground as prevention. We obviously need to understand in terms of system change and strategy and where we're going to resource things. We need to think about that as prevention, and there's benefits of doing that. But in terms of how that is experienced by people, if you include people, if you respect rights, if you ensure that children have access to education and good quality healthcare, if you do all of those things, they are the things that we know, the evidence is very clear, will prevent children going on to offend.
And was that explicit in the strategic conversations that you were having?
Yeah, it is, and there's a very exciting project that we we worked with colleagues at South Lanarkshire, and a range of other partners as well. But it's based in South Lanarkshire, funded by the National Lottery, about system change, and it's called Inclusion as Prevention. So it's grappling with that exact question, like how do we do that? How do we include as a means of prevention without using the prevention language and labeling and stigmatizing in the way I've described? How do we operationalize that? And does that make a difference? And how much? And if so, how much does it save? How much will we be able to reinvest back into inclusion activities that we then know prevent? And how do we tell a story about that? And even the story of the project. Mm-hmm. Very complex. How do you do that without talking about prevention when it is about prevention?
Yeah.
So these things are complex, and I think that project, you've still got another couple of years to run, but I think there will be really exciting learning from that work for others doing similar and thinking about similar themes.
So there's a few things that are coming up. One of them is, how do you get the people that you need to be around the table to have the conversations about children's human rights, a rights-based approach within the prevention agenda, or even not explicitly about that at that point? How do you get them? What's the hook to get them around the table and to use the space that CYCJ offers to have that conversation?
Yeah, I think that's the real nub of it, because it's very easy, obviously, and sometimes you must work with those who want to change and are willing to change and can lead the way, but you can't just do that. So yeah, it's a very good question. My experience, my experience about how things change in watching this a few times is things. My experience has been things often reach a tipping point and then they change, and it's like that. Actually, it feels like you're pushing and you're pushing and you're pushing and you're talking and you're challenging and you're being challenged, and it's feeling sometimes quite tense actually, because you're talking about emotional things and things that are very challenging and difficult for people to hear and hold. And then there's something that happens, or there's a shift, or enough people start thinking a certain thing, and then it just all of a sudden just feels like a change has happened. People start talking the same language, people start contacting you saying, how can we change this? And so that's been my experience a couple of times really, and it's not how I anticipated change would happen. And it doesn't always happen like that, I recognise that. So in terms of what you're saying, then how do you get those, perhaps those are a bit more resistant to the change around that table when you really need them? My experience has been where that has really worked well. It's been talking to other people, getting other people on board, so they then experience a volume of people saying, no, we really need to do this. They start hearing it from every direction, from policy, from practice, in newspapers. Journalists, I think, can be really key. Communities can be really key too. Community council. Once ideas start percolating in that way, then it's so much more, people become so much more open to that dialogue. So sometimes I think it's that indirect approach, you build that allegiance, and sometimes it's really having that honest conversation about what is this about, what is the barrier, is this, and reflecting also on what you're doing that's the problem. I think that's the other bit. It's quite easy, I think, sometimes to fall into a trap of thinking, oh, if they just change what they're doing, rather than if I change, and I think that's really important, to reflect on what you're doing that's contributing to a barrier and a problem. And we all do it at times, including myself, as I'm sort of ending my time, something I reflect on that I don't think I've always been very good at has been to really ask very clearly for what I want, what I would like to happen. I'm a sort of a more kind of reflective, academic kind of person, or take that approach sometimes. So I analyze a problem, I identify what's going on, but I sometimes don't go and say, this is the context. Can you do this? Would you do? I've
Rather than waiting for people to get there themselves. It's like, I suppose if you were to choose a combination of factors or issues that is least likely to get support, it would probably be children, crime, and human rights, because all of them have negative connotations and responses quite often, and what you've done is put them all together. So it's almost like you've got a triple whammy. We often have trouble just getting people to talk about children rather than young people or youth, because young people and youth tend to mean older young people. And if we're talking about prevention agenda, we really need to be talking about early years and upwards. So that these in terms of challenges and barriers and opportunities, how do you navigate that? Because what you're talking about, if you're going to reduce the numbers significantly the way you have, somebody has to decide that a child doesn't deserve to go into a secure unit, into secure accommodation. And it's the basis on which you make that decision. That's the culture, isn't it? That's the culture of your organisation or society. And we are rooted in a culture of reward and punishment in Scotland, everywhere. So yeah, just some reflections on that would be really interesting to hear.
Yeah, it's really difficult, isn't it, to think about what you do, because you do it.
Yeah.
So, but I think the key is really, this has been years of work. I've been in post 8 years now. It's having these conversations with people over that length of time. So it's sitting with these issues over time, talking to people, building an evidence base about what the issues are and how you do something about this, finding the people who want to change and working with them to design things that change things. So not just as useful as that is, not just policy statements, not just strategies, but actually what the practice looks like, what the work looks like, and really trying to bring all of these people together. I think that is the way. But it's 8 years of banging your head sometimes against a brick wall, and not being listened to, not being in the room. Over the sort of coronavirus period, a lot of my time has been spent trying to alert the system to the fact that although we have such small numbers in our young offenders institution now, 94% of them are there on remand. So 94% of them haven't had a trial. So at the moment then, of those 17 children in the young offenders institution, only one is sentenced. Only one has had a trial. The other 16 are innocent until proven guilty. And they are locked up in a young offenders institution during a pandemic. So the limited family, limited education opportunities. So that for me, that's been difficult, because I have been there thinking, why are you not alarmed? This is about the most alarming scenario that we can envisage for this group of children. And so a lot of my time has been going to people, raising the issue, making people aware, looking at the data, because people haven't necessarily been watching how many children are there in prison, how many children are on remand, so they haven't spotted that kind of problem. So then talking to people, making sure the care inspectorate, the prison inspectorate have the most up-to-date data that we're able to find, helping them think about what's going on, helping them ask questions, asking questions ourselves, supporting dialogue with journalists about that, supporting and encouraging conversation with civil servants, with policymakers, with practitioners. Yeah, it's a lot of work behind the scenes, almost one-on-one, trying to help people understand what's happening and why it's an issue.
And that's often the way the change happens, isn't it? It's that one-to-one growing increase in understanding and awareness through a positive relationship that forces people to look at something in a different way. And how much has human rights been at the heart of any of those conversations? Does anybody else bring it up? Does it frame those conversations? Can you see incorporation making a difference to those kinds of conversations?
I mean, I think, yes, I can now. I think there's been there has been a significant shift, and there will continue to be a significant shift as people understand and we all better understand what this means, and how we do it, and how we really genuinely incorporate UNCRC into everything that we do, and how we think and how we resource things and everything. Obviously, it's a journey, but something has clicked, I think, for a volume of people. This tipping point I've kind of talked about, something has clicked for enough people to be aware of the issues and be thinking about it in this way, that people that I'm engaging with them are very alert to what the rights issues are, and you find people sort of quoting back then deprivation of liberty as a last resort for the shortest period possible. You hear the UNCRC articles being used and thought about, and the opportunity of that too, because there are amazing people wanting to do an amazing thing. Most people in our world do want to do the best possible thing for these children, and I think then, yeah, people are up for it. People are ready to face the challenge of how they may need to change to do that. In the main, you always get pockets of resistance and so on, but I think you've got a volume of people that really do want to do this in a meaningful way. What they need is support to do it, potential resources to do it, help to understand what that means, and a lot of uncertainty and confusion about what does what do these rights mean in this context, in a court, in a children's hearing, in a early and effective intervention process. How
in a school, yeah.
All the things, like what does that look like? And we're just learning. Some of that we don't have examples. We have good principles perhaps, but they've not been sort of really thought through in that kind of really deep and kind of consistent way. As always, you get pockets of brilliance,
Yeah. And I suppose what you've touched on throughout this conversation is the intersectionality of some of those conversations and practices, so that people are not feeling that they're ploughing their own furrow. And if they don't understand something that's a wee bit beyond that, they're too frightened to ask for help, or you talked about CYCJ being a safe space for people. That's important as well, isn't it? Because it feels like this is such a complex area of work when you're working in a culture, in a country of reward and punishment, trying to push an agenda where we want people to be kinder, more considerate, more empathetic, understand that the prevention agenda means better outcomes, but it means that we have to think differently in the first place. You've been on that journey.
Yeah, and recognizing that for busy people doing busy work in very hard-hitting area of practice, that's a really tricky thing to do. It's not something that you can just come to a different space and engage with. You need a space and a relationship to be able to trust and open up and phone the team at CYCJ and say, I've got this child, I don't know what to do, I don't know the best approach, and be open about not knowing that. So yeah, I think that's that really is the key, to be able to have that trust. It's like anything. Trust in relationships, and the time to invest, for everybody to invest in those.
And it's such a new area of work, really. A rights-based approach is new for folk, isn't it? And people will be thinking, oh, I should know this, but actually it's very new, and we need to be able to identify places and people that can support folk on that journey. We're coming to the end of the conversation, Claire, but we have a few minutes left. Is there anything else that you'd like to raise or share or add as a provocation?
Yeah,
anything at all?
I suppose that one thing I've not kind of said, but I do feel like so often we have been in this difficult space at CYCJ, talking about as exactly you described, children, justice, and rights, and we really need advocates to step in this space with us. Sometimes it has felt we have been a slightly lone voice thinking about children in the justice system as a specific group, to really think about their rights. Along the way, we have worked with some amazing people, and I'm so grateful for that. But sometimes bigger organisations or people advocating for other rights for other children sometimes haven't always stepped into this space, and I really feel like there's so much potential. Come and join us and advocate for the rights of these children as well. It's not instead of, it's not, you don't disrespect the rights of children who you are thinking of as victims by stepping into the space where you're thinking about children that cause harm to others. Often, obviously, the children's experience is much more complicated than that dichotomy allows anyway. But even if it wasn't, we want to respect all children's rights. It's not, you don't have to just think about one group or another. It can't be like that. So yeah, just I suppose I'd end on that note. Please, we need a body of people to be thinking about these children in whatever lens you're thinking about, whatever work you're doing across the sector as well.
And whatever sector they're working in, we all need to be in the prevention space, don't we? And so everything that we can do to support children and families, from conception right the way through is going to make a difference in that space, because we're identifying problems and potential problems upstream. Yeah. It's amazing. It's an amazing amount of work that you've done, and you know, you've been really inspiring. And I know that you're held in such huge respect, Claire. And I love the shield that your colleagues thought to get you and to have made for you, because it meant a lot to you at the time, and it just kind of sums you up. You know, a gentle dragon, I think I have to say. And also in terms of coming together, you're an unfearty, and I'm sure you will continue to be an unfearty. And that, yeah, there you go. Oh, here's my badge. The it, bringing people together, and through the year of childhood, we want as many people as possible to join on the unfearty, to join the unfearty movement, so that by the end of this year we've got a map. You'll be able to click on it, you'll be able to see yourself and lots of other people who are stepping up to the plate to have these kinds of conversations, and to begin to unpack some of these complex challenges that we've got, that we can't any longer be looking in silos. We have to, children don't see their lives in silos, do they? They experience everything in their lives all the time. And so we look forward to staying in touch with you as you go on to the next steps of your exciting journey, and through Year of Childhood and beyond.
Thank you. Thanks ever so much, and for the Children's Parliament, for all the work you've done, and for the project to develop these beautiful shields that finally, because you know, it felt sometimes you need a shield if you're going to be brave. you need that protection and support. So yeah, it meant and means an awful lot to me. Thank you, Tammy.
We'll make sure she knows that you've got that in pride of place in your house. Thanks a lot, Claire. Take care, and all the very best for the next steps.
Thank you.